Imagine a boy sultan, just 6 years old, taking the most powerful throne in the world. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was the reality for Mehmed IV, who became the Ottoman Sultan in 1648. His reign would become one of the longest in the empire's history, a dramatic saga of dazzling highs and catastrophic lows, forever changing the course of the Ottoman state. But how did a child navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics? The answer lies not just with the Sultan, but with a family of brilliant administrators who would steer the ship of state, the K. When Mehmed IV ascended the throne, the Ottoman Empire was in chaos. His predecessor, Ibrahim the Mad, had left a legacy of corruption, military defeats, and political instability. The treasury was empty, the provinces were restless, and the powerful Janissary corps were practically running the show in Istanbul. For the first few years of his reign, young Mehmed was a pawn in the hands of his grandmother, the formidable Sem Sultan, and his mother, Turhan Sultan. Their intense rivalry for power, known as the Sultanate of Women, only deepened the crisis. It was a time of palace intrigues, assassinations, and constant turmoil. The empire was like a ship caught in a violent storm, without a captain at the helm. It desperately needed a firm hand, someone who could restore order and purpose. That firm hand arrived in 1656, with the empire on the brink of collapse. Turhan Sultan, having finally won her power struggle, made a gamble. She appointed an elderly but fiercely competent Albanian pasha named K. Mehmed Pasha as Grand Vizier, but he didn't just accept the job. He dictated his terms. He demanded absolute authority, the power to make appointments and dismissals without interference, and a promise that no one, not even the Sultan's mother, would challenge his decisions. Desperate, Turhan agreed. This was the beginning of the K era, a period that would see a remarkable revival of Ottoman fortunes. K. Mehmed Pasha was ruthless but effective. He launched a brutal purge, executing tens of thousands of corrupt officials, rebellious soldiers, and incompetent governors. He was an old-school enforcer, believing that fear was the most effective tool for restoring order. He refilled the treasury by confiscating illicit fortunes and reforming the tax system. He rebuilt the navy and re-energized the army, leading them to victory against the Venetians and putting down revolts across the empire. While his methods were harsh, they worked. Within just 5 years, he had stabilized the empire, pulling it back from the edge of the abyss. When K. Mehmed died in 1661, his power didn't die with him. In an unprecedented move, he was succeeded as Grand Vizier by his son, Fazıl Ahmed Pasha. Unlike his stern father, Fazıl Ahmed was a cultured and skilled diplomat and military strategist. He continued his father's reforms but with a more sophisticated touch. He focused on infrastructure, building bridges and caravanserais, and patronized scholars and artists. But he was also a brilliant military commander. Under his leadership, the Ottoman army conquered the island of Crete from Venice after a grueling 24-year siege, a massive symbolic victory. He also expanded Ottoman territory in Eastern Europe, capturing key fortresses in modern-day Ukraine and Poland. During this time, Sultan Mehmed IV had grown into a man. He wasn't the kind of ruler to be chained to his desk in the palace. His great passion was hunting. In fact, he was known as Avisi, or Mehmed the Hunter. He would spend months on end on lavish hunting expeditions, moving his entire court with him, while some historians criticize him for this, seeing it as a neglect of his duties. Others argue it was a clever political move. These grand hunts were not just for sport. They were massive military-style processions that allowed him to project his power across the provinces, keeping local governors in check and reminding everyone who was in charge. He was a visible, mobile sovereign, a stark contrast to his palace-bound predecessors, while the K managed the day-to-day administration. Mehmed provided the imperial presence and legitimacy. The partnership between the Sultan and his viziers seemed unstoppable. The empire was stable, prosperous, and expanding. But this era of renewed confidence bred a dangerous ambition. After Fazl Ahmed's death, the Grand Vizierate passed to his ambitious brother-in-law, Kara Mustafa Pasha. Kara Mustafa dreamed of a spectacular military triumph that would eclipse all previous conquests, the capture of Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire. He believed that taking Vienna would not only secure Ottoman dominance in Europe but also solidify his own place in history. He convinced Sultan Mehmed to support this monumental undertaking. In 1683, a colossal Ottoman army, one of the largest ever assembled, marched on Vienna. At first, the campaign seemed destined for success. The Ottoman forces laid siege to the city, their cannons pounding the walls day and night. The defenders were outnumbered and on the verge of starvation. All of Europe held its breath. It looked as if the heart of Christendom was about to fall. But Kara Mustafa Pasha made a series of critical errors. He was overconfident, delaying the final assault in the hope that the city would surrender, preserving its wealth for him to plunder. This delay proved fatal. It gave the defenders just enough time for a massive Christian relief army to arrive, led by the Polish king, John III Sobieski. On September 12, 1683, from the hills overlooking Vienna, Sobieski launched one of the largest cavalry charges in history. The Polish winged hussars crashed into the Ottoman lines, shattering their morale and their formation. The Ottoman army, caught between the city's defenders and the relief force, collapsed in two. A panicked retreat. The siege was broken. The dream of conquering Vienna turned into an absolute nightmare. The defeat at Vienna was more than just a lost battle. It was a turning point. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility. It energized a coalition of European powers, the Holy League, who now went on the offensive. Over the next few years, the Ottomans suffered a series of devastating defeats, losing vast territories in Hungary, Greece, and along the Dalmatian coast. The successful reforms of the had been undone by one man's catastrophic ambition. The once full treasury was drained and the army was demoralized. Back in Istanbul, the people needed a scapegoat. Kara Mustafa Pasha was executed on the Sultan's orders, but that wasn't enough to quell the rising anger. The blame ultimately fell on Sultan Mehmed for himself. The man who had presided over the empire's revival was now blamed for its calamitous decline. His long hunting trips, once seen as a display of power, were now viewed as extravagant negligence. In 1687, the army, disgusted by the string of defeats, mutinied. They marched on the capital and deposed Mehmed the Hunter. He was forced to abdicate in favor of his brother and spent the last few years of his life in confinement within the palace. The reign of Mehmed IV is a story of incredible contrasts. It began in the chaos of the Sultanate of Women, rose to a golden age of stability and expansion under the viziers, and ended in the disastrous failure at the gates of Vienna. It shows how the fate of an empire can rest on the shoulders of a few key individuals, and how even the most spectacular revival can be shattered by a single moment of hubris. The Hunter Sultan's long and dramatic reign marks the end of Ottoman expansion and the beginning of a long, painful decline. It's a powerful reminder that in history, the line between glory and disaster is often razor thin. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the crossroads of history.